start recording now. Okay. So again, before I start today, I want to remind you that you need to be reading. It's good that you have, that you come to class, great. It's good that you have the lecture notes, that's fantastic. But remember, you have a series of readings. Most of them are PDF documents that are really important for you to have, much richer idea of the topics and breadth and depth, because in an hour I can just only do so much. So please don't forget to read. It's very important, very important. And I guarantee you, and at least I hope, that by reading you are going to some questions are going to appear in your head, and I think it's a good exercise anyway, even if you don't get questions or additional questions. Anyway, any comments, any questions today before I start? No, let me go to my other screen to make sure everybody there is fine. Okay, 30 people. Awesome. All right. So I am going to start sharing my screen so that we can start talking about dependency theory, okay? Last class, we went over a brief background on different theories of development and how economic development has been considered a relatively new field and has a lot of connections with political economy, especially because, we're talking about making progress for sustainable progress for people on Earth, right? So this is what economics is about, so it's not a surprise. Anyway, so let's jump straight into dependency theory. And I am going to talk about two groups. I'm going to talk about the radical group of dependency theorists and the more moderate group, okay? Now, keep in mind, this is a theory. And later, we are going to explore the policy implications of the theory. So right now, I'm just describing the very fundamental ideas of this group of people at the theoretical level, okay? And next week, we are going to look into the policies that these guys recommended that many countries, not only in Latin America, but in Asian countries were implemented. And of course, we are going to also discover the success in one region versus the failures in the other, the whys and why nots, and so forth. So, all right, dependency theory. First radical person, Andre Gundar Frank. This is a German guy that, and I don't want to read what you can read on your own. I just want to expand. So in yellow, I have the main point of this guy. He says, first of all, actually, I should highlight this as well. Countries do not fail in the quest for economic development only because of their own making. It's not only dependent on the endowment of natural resources or the domestic policies or the political climate. Yeah, all of these are important factors, but perhaps the most important factor is that rich countries have produced a set of rules of the game, and we are going to explore what these rules of the game exactly means, so that they can take advantage, they can prey on these poor countries, right? So it's not, and I'm moving to the second yellow area right here, it's not that developing countries are countries in the making, in their way to becoming developed. No. There is a very clear distinction between developing, which is an action verb that indicates you are in the process to attain development. That's different from underdeveloped. Underdeveloped is a static, passive word, meaning or indicating that it's a, permanent or at least a quasi-permanent state of affairs. You are underdeveloped, period. You have high unemployment rates, high poverty rates, high pollution rates. All of these things are what we consider underdeveloped. And Gunther Frank says this is produced not only by domestic factors, but more importantly by external foreign factors. Let me admit one more person. All right. So here's the radical aspect of Gunther Frank. Rich countries, he says, and I'm reading here, rich countries become rich by making the other countries poor. Whoa, okay, that's a big statement, right? You know, now when you think about this, in the traditional neoclassical, neoliberal, mainstream economic sense, this is not a possibility, because if you remember, as long as markets are efficient, not just domestic markets, but international markets, and I'm talking about markets for goods and services, financial markets, labor markets, in this Pareto optimal scenario, which basically means, you know, steady state, everything is in equilibrium, well, we should be observing this trickle-down effect. The benefits of all this market activity should be distributed, perhaps not equally shared, but they should reach everybody, not just a few, right? So basically what this guy, Gunther Frank is saying is that the only way, you know, this is one of the political, theoretic, the policy implications, according to him, the only way for a developing country, or rather a underdeveloped country, to develop is by withdrawing itself from world markets. You need to cut ties with rich economies, because if you don't, they're going to be taking advantage of you. You need to reduce to the minimum international trade, international finance, and all of these dealings with the rest of the world. Otherwise, you're going to be victimized by, well, now what we call globalization. And pretty radical approach, right? And, you know, he provides some examples of, you know, this, you know, penetration of capitalism into these very old structures of developing countries, you know, and the most important one is, for us, is this one, the destruction of the Maya, the Incan, and the Aztec civilizations by the Spanish conquistadors that we already covered. But of course, he's trying to give some historical context. He's talking about current events. And by current, I mean the 1950s, the 1960s, right? So this is a theory that was very important in the 50s, especially in the 60s. Anyway, let's move on to another radical economist. And this is a Russian economist by the name of Paul Baran. This guy is important because he was the first, or among the first, to start giving some names and some concepts to the theory. The most important one is this distinction between, let me do this. I'm gonna try to use my skills once again. Let's see if they work. So he was talking about a distinction between periphery and center countries. So the periphery are all poor, underdeveloped countries. And in the center, you're going to find all rich, developed, industrialized, the dominant metropolitan countries, right? So in the 1960s, we're talking about the US, Europe, Canada, Australia. These are countries in the center. In the periphery, we're talking about Africa, Latin America, some Asian economies, right? So what this guy is talking about is something very interesting. And this is here. Let's see. Let me highlight this here. These alliances. All right. So let me stop sharing this screen because I want to go to my whiteboard. So to explain something important here. All right. So think about this. This is what Paul Baran is talking about. Imagine two countries. And this is the best way I can do with circles. So sorry, guys. So here you have a rich country, and here you have a poor country, okay? Now, when you go to a rich country, you're going to find a lot of rich people, but you also are going to find a lot of poor people. So R is rich, P is poor. And of course, when you go to a poor country, you're going to find a lot of poor people, but you also are going to find some rich people. So what Paul Baran is talking about is this. If you notice, you have rich people here in the rich country, but you also have rich people here in the poor country. Typically, these are the groups that control the economy. They have control over the industrial base, and more likely they also have some sort of control or at least significant influence on the political process. So they have political power too. So they can make decisions, they can institute policy, and so forth. And more importantly, these groups typically speak the same language. And I'm not talking about English, although English could be part of it. I'm talking about the market-based language. You know, the idea of making things more efficient in order to make more money, to maximize profit. That's the type of language that I'm talking about. So there is this coincidence of interest between rich people in rich countries and rich people in poor countries. So when they find each other, they figure out, why not? Let's become partners. So the rich people in poor countries, these people right here, they start inviting investment, for example, by rich people in rich countries here. So you have investments. And typically this investment comes in the form of MNCs. Remember? Multinational corporations. I'm talking about investment, not just through the stock market, because by the way, many poor economies don't even have stock market. Now I'm talking about what is actually called foreign direct investment. We are going to be using this terminology several times later. So I'm talking about something called FDI. These are my parentheses. FDI, foreign direct investments. So I'm talking about brick and mortar, industries, buildings, equipment, all of these things to extract resources, to extract raw materials, to employ people. That's the type of thing, right? So let me go back so I can share once again my slides here. So this is what Paul Baran is talking about. How do I make this smaller? I don't know. There we go. Something happened here. Anyway, these alliances. So in the mind of Paul Baran, these alliances produce what he calls a social glue, some sort of bonding between local and international elites that have the same goal: to perpetuate economic privilege of the upper class, and they have no interest in sharing this economic and political power with anybody. Like, whoa, all right. So think about this. What this guy is talking about is that, yes, there is a strong connection between the center and the periphery. The periphery is fully dependent on the decisions of the center countries. They have no access to technology. They have no access to, well, capital, and they only are at the expense of the decisions made by the periphery. So, I'm sorry, by the center countries. So in the mind of this radical guy, the only solution was revolution. You know, eventually we were supposed to see world wars, you know, international conflicts, something really, really bad. right? So there you have two radical dependency theorists. Now let's move on to a more moderate guy. This guy is called, his name is Celso Furtado. He died about, in 2004. But this basically says, okay, relax, guys. You're taking this too far. Let's talk about what is actually going on here. All right. So Celso Furtado speaks about that because the way economic history has evolved, some nations following this principle of comparative advantage, which was the recipe given to us by Adam Smith as one of the ingredients for economic success, have concentrated in the production and exports of primary goods. Let me see if I can do this. Primary goods. So when we talk about primary exports, let me do this with red. Every time I move my right here, this is what I'm trying to do. So, bear with me, guys. There we go. Primary goods. This guy right here. I'm talking about raw materials. I'm talking about agriculture. I'm talking about mining. I'm talking about fisheries, right? So all of this is primary goods. The value added is really minimal. So think about this. Many rich countries send multinational corporations to places like, let's talk about, Costa Rica in Latin America. And then they harvest lots of oranges, primary good, right, in agriculture. And then these oranges are being exported to the US or Europe, where we squeeze them, pasteurize them, put in a nice package, and that's the value added I'm talking about. And if you know something about business, basic business, the profit margin is not at the early stages of production. So the profit margin is not going to come from selling oranges. It's going to come from the value added, the packaging, the marketing, the transportation, the squeezing, the pasteurizing. All of this is done in rich countries, and in many cases, rich countries sell this already manufactured orange juice in a can back to the developing countries. Like, right? Yeah. And this happens with fish, wood, gold, silver. In case you are not familiar with this, Mexico is one of the largest producers of oil, but Mexico doesn't have enough refineries to produce gasoline. So what Mexicans, today, I'm talking about 2021, so I'm not talking about 1960s, I'm talking about this year. What Mexico and many other countries do is that they sell or export oil to the US, where we have the refineries, and then here in the US, we produce the gasoline, and then we sell the gasoline back to Mexicans. Pretty crazy stuff, right? Anyway, this is what Celso Furtado is talking about. It just happened that, rich countries, let me take this back, countries that are rich in natural resources saw the opportunity to exploit producing and exporting these goods because they were easy. They have lots of them. Remember, Latin America, rubber, coffee, gold, silver, fish, tuna fish is a big one, right? And of course, rich countries that were not as well endowed in terms of natural resources, they start producing manufactured goods, right? So basically he's saying, yes, it's true that we were in troubles, but this is the result of these historical dynamics in the way division of labor has been taking place around the world. And then we move on to another moderate economist by the name of Osvaldo Zunkel. Now, keep track of all these Russian, German, Brazilian, Chilean, right? So a lot of these ideas are born not necessarily in rich countries. You know, I am not citing any Australian, European, or American economist, right? So think about that. Anyway, here is Osvaldo Zunkel. Yeah, you know, he cites pretty clearly with Celso Furtado, and he says, well, the other problem is these structural bottlenecks. You know, by that basically he means that once you concentrate on particular sectors, remember we talk about the Dutch disease, agriculture as the only source of income, you produce some structural distortions because you are not allowing other industries to develop, like in manufacturing or the services sector. More recently now we have, maybe within services, the telecommunications industry, which is huge too. Anyway, and then we move on to another Brazilian, another Chilean economist, Cardoso and Faleto, moderate approach. Well, yes, all of this is true, but we need to be careful because economic power can be expressed as social domination through politics, right? And later we are going to explore this in greater detail. But the point is that, you know, it's not just about money. It's not just about wealth. It's not just about maximizing profits. These guys saw as a concern the possibility of social domination by certain groups that were holding economic power, controlling the political process. So, I mean, I don't know if, let me give you an idea of what these guys are talking about. I mean, just because, you know, I was there to see it. Let me put my whiteboard again. All right. So let me clear this up. And then let's see. All right. So let me give you a basic. I know you're thinking, what is he doing, right? Well, bear with me. So this is Mexico. And of course, here is the USA. Here is the border. Here is Mexico. Mexico. All right. All right. Here is, of course, the Gulf that goes to Europe. And here is the Pacific Ocean that goes to Asia, right? So I'm going somewhere with this, so bear with me. So I was born in Mexico City, which is more or less right here. And here is Puebla, where I was raised. Well, it turns out Volkswagen, the only Volkswagen plant in the entire Americas, North, Central, and South America, is located in Puebla. I'm talking about the German car manufacturer, right? So the Volkswagen plant. So when I was going to school back in Mexico, I had lots of German friends because, well, the German engineers and the people working for Volkswagen brought their families over here. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is this. The Volkswagen plant has a lot of power, not just in Puebla, but the entire country, because get this, they employ a huge amount of people, and through backward linkages and forward linkages, the rubber industry for the tires, the steel industry for the bodies of the car, the glass industry for the windows, and you get the idea, depend on Volkswagen, right? So they use this economic power to influence the political power by threatening to leave. So I remember when they achieve things like this. The Volkswagen plant has the only, or one of the few industries that for which the government, the federal government, pay for a water treatment plant. This is the only plant that in the backyard, well, actually, let me put this here, the backyard, they have a railroad so they can take the cars to the Gulf or the cars to the Pacific Ocean. I'm talking about 50 feet from the door, the back door of the plant. So they can mount the cars in the trains and ship them over, right? They have their own electricity. But get this, all of this was paid by the government. None of these monies were Volkswagen money. And every time they want something, they said, well, if you don't give me this, I'm leaving. You know, Costa Rica is offering me a very good deal. Or, you know, Colombia is offering me a very good deal. No, don't leave, don't leave. What do you need? Well, and that way they can influence the political process. Who's going to be the, the mayor? Who's going to be the governor of the state? It's crazy, guys. Anyway, that's what this guy is talking about. All right, let me pause for a second. Any comments, any questions so far?
Yeah, Professor, I had a question about sort of Paul Baran and Frank.
Yes, Cody.
Sort of ideas about leaving the international markets. Would it really be considered a radical idea? Because you can't really say that they've reached a point where they've run out of their natural resources. So they don't really have that same incentive that they're sort of proposing that they would need to leave the international markets, because they still have a reason to participate since they have something to provide for industrialized countries.
Yes.
But if they didn't have anything to provide, then the rich countries would sort of throw them to the wayside based on what sort of they're saying. And that would sort of give them a push towards remaining sort of just in their own little space.
Yes. No, you're right. I mean, that is a good point. Remember, this is a theory. As far as I know, there is no country in the world now or even before in history that has been able to completely isolate from the rest of the world. Even places like, say, North Korea today, you know, I don't know how much you know about North Korea, that is very isolated. They, of course, have to trade. They, of course, have to, deal with many other countries, either secretly or not, right? So one of the implications of this, because you are right, they cannot fully isolate or cut ties. So let me explain something. Normally in economics, we talk about this. N is north and S is south. So in the north, ouch, what happened to my, right here? I lost my, can you still see my whiteboard, guys? Okay, so in the north, you have rich countries, and in the south, you have poor countries. So in the north, once again, Europe, US, Canada, Australia, south is Latin America and so forth. So what these guys are talking about is that maybe there is a way to eliminate the ties with the north if we can figure out, I'm talking about on behalf of the poor countries, if we can figure out a way to expand our international trade with other countries in the south. So the idea was not so much to cut ties completely with everybody. It was more about redefine, to move in a different direction from north-south type of relationships to south-south, right? So basically what people in Latin America were thinking, well, rather than trying to establish financial and trade and commercial connections with Europe, we should be trying to establish some connections with Asia, with African countries. Forget about the US, forget about England, forget about Australia. Let's talk about the same things with, I don't know, Taiwan, or in Africa, South Africa, that type of thing. Does that make sense, Cody?
Yeah, I was going to sort of piggyback on that and suggest something similar, because I was thinking in my head, instead of, since like you were saying, they can't really leave the global market per se,
right?
It's sort of, if they form an economic coalition similar to something like the EU among themselves, especially considering they're, for the most part, all at a similar point of development, it would be a bit more beneficial for them than sort of
Yes.
participating and being at the whim of industrialized countries.
Right.
I remember in Dr. Borzon's class for the Middle Eastern political economy, it talked about how industrialized countries are kind of forcing less developed countries to abide by rules that they didn't have to when they were sort of developing. So they're kind of forcing global markets and free trade on countries that aren't necessarily going to benefit from it.
Right, right. Yes. Later, we are going to talk about the efforts to integrate Latin America, most of which, unfortunately, have failed. Let me tell you this quick story, just because, again, I always sprinkle stories like this because hopefully they're going to help you remember. So it was probably 8 years ago. Don't quote me on this. One of the students in one of my classes came very early in the morning, before everybody else, and he said, he was nervous, like, "Hey, professor, have you heard about this new currency that the U.S., Canada, and Mexico are launching?" Like, what are you talking about? Anyway, so we have the euro, right, which is obviously a hard currency, European, and all that. This guy in the radio start running the rumor that you should be ditching your US dollars, Canadian dollars, and Mexican pesos, because in a secret effort, the governments of these three countries were trying to fully integrate the economies of Canada, the US, and Mexico to really be a force against the European and the Asian forces. And as evidence, he was showing on camera, and you can look at this on YouTube, a metal coin that was called the Amero, like Euro, Amero. And there was this table, and he bangs the coin against the table. Cling, 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 cling. It's real. Dump your money now. It's like, of course, I hadn't seen that thing. So I went online and all that. So, of course, there was this guy that had actually won different awards for designing the coins, real coins with the treasury. And he had the machinery at home and all that. So he actually coined a few and he started selling them online. But there was no intention at all to integrate the US like that, because the idea to integrate the US, Canadian, and Mexican economy like that, because the idea, according to this conspiracy theory guy online on YouTube, was that eventually NAFTA at the time, the North American Free Trade Agreement between these three countries, was going to be extended throughout the Americas, all the way to Chile and Argentina. And therefore, the US was going to be the head, the same way Germany is the head of Europe or the European Union, the US would be the head of this Latin America or America integration. By the way, we think of America as the US, but if you talk to anybody except American people about America, they don't think of the US. They think about the entire continent, from Canada all the way to Chile. So I'm Mexican. I was born in Mexico, but I am American too, because I was born in the American continent. But anyway, so that's why I always emphasize US, not America. There's the US, Canada, and Mexico. Anyway, so yes, Cody, these real efforts to integrate Latin America have been going for many, many, many years, and we are going to explore some of those later. Yes, yes. Any other question or comment?
Professor?
Yes, Diego.
I had a question concerning Celso Furtado and his kind of theory.
Yep.
How you said that the poor have the resources, but then they send them to the rich to get packaged or processed, but then they sell them back to the poor countries.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking, like, these poor countries have the labor, they have the resources, but all they lack are the technologies and capital. So, would these underdeveloped or poor countries, if they invested in technologies and capital, would they be able to achieve some sort of growth like the rich countries?
Well, that's you're in the right track, Diego. Let me take 2 steps ahead to address your question that we are going to cover next week. One of the policy implications of dependency theory is precisely what you are describing. And the name of these policies was import substitution industrialization, ISI, that you probably have seen in other classes. So the idea, like you said, Diego, I mean, you're thinking as an economist. I'm glad you brought this up, because what these guys were thinking is like, okay, so what we need to do is to do something similar to what rich countries did when they were poor. They protected the domestic economy so that they could grow domestic industries at home, make sure they were ready for international competition. And when that happened, you could open up your economy again. So we are going to be talking about the infant industry argument, tariffs, quotas, all these ideas to protect the economy, injecting capital to develop native technology, and hopefully become competitive. So we are going to talk about that, Diego. Just hang on. You're in the right track. You are absolutely in the right track. Yeah. All right. So let me keep going here. Share screen. All right. Osvaldo Zunkel. And then finally, Samir Amin, the only African radical economist espousing dependency theory. This guy was a bit off, in my opinion, because, he basically said, we need a new economic order based on higher prices for raw materials. So this is going to be clearer in the next slide. But the basic idea is like, no, poor countries are getting a really, quote unquote, raw deal, a bad deal, because what we need to do is to start demanding that rich countries pay more for our raw materials. They pay more for my bananas, for fish, for timber. Like, how can you do that? I mean, this is an international market system. It's the interaction of supply and demand that is going to dictate what the price is going to be. So, Mr. Amin, how can you demand a higher price than the ongoing market price, right? We cannot get rid of market-based economics, at least, in the mind of most people, including mine. When you think about it, I mean, sometimes I look like, okay, Professor Avalos is kind of a, leftist, radical guy. No. Believe me, in my mind, there is nothing that humans have created that is more efficient, not equitable, just efficient and awesome than the market, right? So market is probably the best way to allocate resources. We know that. Now, equity problems is a different issue, but it's the most efficient machine that human beings have created. So don't get me wrong. I believe in markets when markets work right, when the institutions supporting the market are right, and many other conditions that we are going to explore later. But anyway, so let me move on to this, which is something that I really want to talk about. So, Professor, give us a few more examples of how this exploitation by rich countries of poor countries is actually taking place. All right. So we already talked about multinational corporations, right? So I hope you basically get the idea. But here is the other problem. When you have international presence, or let me take this back. When you have domestic presence, that's domestic as in poor countries, of international corporations or multinational corporations, it has been documented that they don't typically reinvest the profit they make in the poor country where they are located. They practice what we call profit repatriation, or they repatriate profits. Think about this. I mean, how do I do this? I'm talking about repatriation of profits. So the money that multinational corporations are making by operating in poor countries is not reinvested there in roads or hospitals or expanding or no. They send this money back to the mother country, which could be European or Asian or Canadian or American or whatever. I'm not trying to demonize the US or the Europeans. Could be of any nationality, right? This is important, guys, because, well, when these monies leak out, they are drained out of poor countries, there is less money in circulation that could be used for infrastructure, for development, period. The other problem, and this is an international accounting problem, is that many multinational corporations have the ability to declare a profit level in countries that tax very, very low. The corporate tax income rate, the corporate tax to income is very low. So they escape taxation, they don't reinvest the money, and, well, they make money because of the value-added argument that we explored already with the orange juice. But here is another very important one that I really want to explain in the last few minutes, because if I don't do this live, it's going to be very tough. So let me stop sharing this. I want to explain something that is very important, guys. All right, here I go. This is something called, I'm trying to write TT. This is, let me do this again, very quickly. TT is terms of trade. Terms of trade are equal to the price of export divided by the price of imports. So X is exports and M is imports. All right. So I'm talking about exports of raw materials for poor countries in Latin America, and I'm talking about imports of manufactured goods. So remember, Latin America is exporting raw materials, raw materials, and is importing manufactured technological goods, right? Now, think about this. As the world economy improves, the world income goes up. And most of you econ students remember that normal goods behave the following way. The higher your income, the more you buy of them. That's the definition of a normal income, right? The more money you have, the more you buy of them, right? So as the world income increases, the demand for raw materials goes up and the demand for manufactured technological goods goes up as well. But think about this. How many mangoes can you eat in a day? How many pineapples? And then think about this. How many cars do you have? How many, pairs of shoes and, other things that have been manufactured you have in your closet? There is not the same limitation, right? In other words, what I'm trying to say is that as the world income goes up, the demand for manufactured and technological goods goes higher and faster than the demand for raw materials. And as a consequence, the price of exports of raw materials goes up, but the price of manufactured goods goes up even higher. So I'm trying to denote this by my super enlarged arrow pointing up, and this smaller arrow pointing up as well. So as a consequence, the whole ratio goes down. So let me give you some intuition about what this means. So think about this. 10 years ago or 20 years ago, Costa Rica had to produce, I'm making this up, so don't quote me on this, had to produce 1 metric tons of bananas in exchange for 1 car in the US, right? So poor countries, Latin America, producing and exporting raw materials, bananas, Costa Rica, 1 metric ton in order to buy 1 car from the US. Are you following? 10 years later, 20 years later, because the price of raw materials has declined relative to the price of manufactured goods, now Costa Rica has to produce not 1 metric ton, but 2 metric tons of bananas in order to buy the same car. You get this? This is what dependency theory calls declining terms of trade. As the world economy improves and as income of people around the world goes up, everybody demands more of everything. But more people are demanding more phones, computers, cars, medical equipment, construction equipment than what they are demanding in terms of fishes, wood, carbon, coffee. And as a consequence, the price of these things that Latin America is exporting is going down relative to the other manufactured technologically goods. And therefore, Latin America has to produce and sell more and more and more and more raw materials in order to buy what they need. But guess what? There is a limit. You cannot store mangoes. You cannot store bananas. You cannot store easily. I mean, I guess you can freeze them and all that, but why would you do that? Instead, you have 3 TV sets at home, 3 cars, 16 pair of shoes. You get the idea? You get the idea here? Anyway, so this is what, let me close with this because I ran out of time. This is what it's called decline in terms of trade right here. So that TT for terms of trade is falling. And this is something that dependency theorists have used over and over to argue for a different arrangement, a different international arrangement, because this is not sustainable, according to them, right? So you have profit repatriation, decline in terms of trade, and we are going to talk about others, but I ran out of time. So I'm gonna have to finish this on my recorded lecture, and I will go over this, the rest of the notes on Friday, right? Anyway, comments, questions before we close, because it's 2:50 already, guys. Man, everybody's so smart. If you ask a question, it could prolong 2, 3, 4 minutes. So, all right, that's okay, guys. If you have questions or comments, office hours, don't forget about them. And I will see you live on Monday again, all right? So if you're watching the Super Bowl, I hope your team wins, all right? Bye, guys. Thank you.
Dr.
Goodbye.
Avalos.
Bye.
See you Monday, Professor.
Yes, thanks.